Welcome to all of you here at Roosevelt and those joining us online. My name is Jessica Neuwirth, and I am the Rita E. Hauser Director of the Human Rights Program. Today, we're here to get an update on the genocidal campaign against the Uyghurs by the Chinese government. There are about 12 million Uyghurs in China, mostly Muslim. As you may have seen in the news recently, on her last day, even her last hours in office, on August 31st, the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, released her report on China, a report that had been repeatedly stalled in its publication. The UN report found credible allegations of torture and ill treatment, including sexual and gender-based violence, that could constitute crimes against humanity. We are very pleased to have organized this event in collaboration with Teng Biao, a courageous Chinese human rights activist and lawyer who is a human rights fellow here at Roosevelt House, and Human Rights Watch, an organization that needs no introduction. But I do want to thank Sophie Richardson, the China director at Human Rights Watch, and Teng Biao for all of their efforts in putting this conference together, as well as Katrina Avila here at Roosevelt House. Before we hear from our keynote speaker, I want to read a message to the conference from Congressman Tom Suozzi, who is co-chair of the Congressional Uyghur Caucus and who had wanted to join us today, but at the last minute was unable to make it. Here's his statement. Thank you to Hunter College's Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute and Human Rights Watch for organizing this important symposium and for asking me to share some brief remarks. We must continue to raise awareness about the crimes against humanity perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party against the Uyghur people. You have all helped provide clear documentation of the CCP's crimes, including forced labor, mass surveillance, forced assimilation, mass detention, sexual violence, forced sterilization, and torture. Last week's report from the UN's Human Rights Office further confirmed these crimes. Unfortunately, few people outside of our government, not-for-profit and human rights circles, are aware of these atrocities. The international community is slowly beginning to condemn these heinous acts, but much more coordinated action is necessary to prevent the continued suffering of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. The world also must condemn the persecution of other groups such as Buddhists in Tibet, students and journalists in the once democratic Hong Kong, and threats against the Taiwanese. Since my time in Congress, I have worked to raise awareness about these atrocities. I helped usher through the passage of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, called on American businesses to cut ties in Xinjiang, and created the Congressional Uyghur Caucus. But even these steps are insufficient. The Chinese Communist Party continues to carry out these crimes that have shocked the world's conscience. It's on all of us, politicians, activists, Chinese Americans, and everyday people, to speak out. When we use our various platforms to call attention to this issue, we form one unified voice to help put an end to the Chinese Communist Party's crimes. Thank you again for the kind invitation. And now, it is a great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Nuri Turkel, who is chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Mr. Turkel is an attorney, author, foreign policy expert, and rights advocate with nearly 2 decades of experience working in the intersection of law, business, government, and the human rights community. As a lawyer, he specializes in global anti-corruption investigation and enforcement, corporate governance, and human rights due diligence. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he works on U.S. foreign policy and national security issues, focusing primarily on China. He is also a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations and was named one of the Time 100 most influential people in the world. He recently published his memoir, No Escape, The True Story of China's Genocide of the Uyghurs. It's a great honor to have you with us. Please help me welcome Nuri Turkel.
Thank you, Jessica, for the warm introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to address this important conference. I'd like to begin by thanking Teng Biao. Teng Biao, thank you so much for lending your voice and your leadership. Your courage has been extraordinary. I'm profoundly grateful. I also wanted to thank Human Rights Watch and my good friend Sophie Richardson. Sophie, I admire your strength, moral clarity, and no-nonsense approach, specifically in dealing with our government officials. I wanted to also thank you for being there for me and my family and many others who are desperately needed to have a voice in our struggle to regain our dignity and freedom from the Communist Party. I also wanted to thank the Hunter College and Human Rights Watch for organizing and sponsoring this conference and inviting me to speak on behalf of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, commonly known as USCIRF. USCIRF is an independent, bipartisan U.S. federal agency that monitors religious freedom abroad and makes policy recommendations to the President, Secretary of State, and Congress. Our future in the free world is at crossroads. Our common values are under active assault by the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP presents more than a mere challenge to democracy, freedom, and human dignity. In today's world, the Chinese regime presents an existential threat to the world order. China rightly deserves the label given by USCIRF as a country of particular concern since 1998 for its long-standing and brutal oppression of ethnic and religious groups. Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in particular have been bearing the brunt of the CCP's atrocities for decades. The situation has deteriorated even more rapidly since Xi Jinping came to power in 2012. I want to start today by acknowledging that on top of the present horrifying situation, CCP is currently starving Uyghurs to death as we speak in another barbaric lockdown under the guise of COVID measures. Children, elderly, and everyone is struggling. Many are driven to suicide in the 6th week of being forcibly confined to their homes and quarantine center without adequate food. This is the latest torture leveled against innocent people in Communist China. We're in the 6th year of active genocide of Uyghur people carried out by CCP regime. We're facing a world in which, as American historian Anne Applebaum put it, the bad guys are winning, meaning authoritarian powers are on the rise without facing serious consequences or pushback. The world is starting to recognize the reality of genocide in China. But as is sadly typical, this recognition is coming far too late, but speaking on these issues is more vital than ever. We must hear the stories. We must act. And they're not statistics or subject for case studies for those intellectuals detached from the reality. These are real people. They are my people, my family, my friends, and my parents. And the perpetrators of their suffering has intention for the free world. Many of the people gathered here to speak to you today were instrumental in sounding the alarm to genocide. But long before internet sleuths and open source analysts found signs of newly built Nazi-style concentration camps and prisons popping up on satellite images. As early as 2016, we had already started to feel the early signs of building atrocities. In 2017, Uyghurs abroad get phone calls, including myself from our loved ones, saying, "Don't call us again, and don't come back under any circumstances." Societal leaders were starting to disappear. First, the Chinese, as you know, denied the existence of these camps. Then they changed the story and said that they were vocational training camps. And what kind of people did they really target to train or re-educate? Thought leaders, social elites, artists and musicians, university professors, high school teachers, even those who are retired, doctors and custodians of Uyghur cultural heritage, parents, children, and grandparents. The Xinjiang police file recently leaked documents and photographs that grant further insight into the profiles of the innocent people suffering in the camps show photos of children with their heads shaved. The wide, terrified eyes of ordinary people show the truth. Contrary to the claims that these are re-education facilities, detainees have been subject to torture, systematic rape, food and water deprivation, and constant political indoctrination. They have been forced to deny their faith and pledge loyalty to the Communist Party. A detail that has escaped much mainstream media coverage is how many formerly healthy individuals have died in the camps or shortly after their release. Some describe life outside the camps as even worse, as they live with the constant fear of being dragged back into the camps. This mental anguish is almost incomprehensible. Many parents abroad lost touch with their family members to only discover videos of their children popping up in Chinese social media. These videos show children who have been stolen from their parents to be placed in what CCP calls boarding schools. They are prompted by their Chinese instructors to shout back perfectly timed, politically correct answers like there are communist boot camps with no indication that they can still speak their mother language or mother tongue. Minimum estimate shows at least 800,000 Uyghur children have been forcibly separated from their family members. Put that in perspective, that's more than the population in our nation's capital. 800,000 children have been deprived of their parents' love. 800,000 children who have forced to memorize carefully crafted slogan to exalt the virtues of the party and phrase the men rip them away from their families. Separation of children from the group is one of the legal criteria for genocide, but there's far more to be told. As birth rates have plummeted because of forced sterilization, mandatory IUD insertions, and mysterious drugs in the camps themselves which have been interfered with the fertility, a genocide intent is more than clear, as you can see from this. The party has also delivered on the promise to break the Uyghur people's lineage, their roots, their connections, and their origins. It is hard to imagine anything more evil than what we have seen in the last 6 years. From the cradle to grave, the choice for Uyghurs is this: assimilate to Han Chinese ethnic identity as defined by the Communist Party, or you die. In Chinese, there's a term, Ni Su Wo Huo. Even for Uyghurs abroad, they are also far from free. For example, myself have not been entirely been able to escape Chinese persecution, even though I'm an American citizen and now a US official. Since my arrival in America in 1995, I have only been able to spend a few months with my parents. I haven't seen my mother since 2004, since when she and my late father came to Washington for my law school graduation. And it's highly likely that I won't see her again in this life. My father passed away in April while I was in official trip to Uzbekistan. And I could not carry his casket, and I haven't been able to mourn with my mother because I've been sanctioned by Xi Jinping's China for calling for accountability on the Uyghur genocide. This past May, I also find out that Russia has sanctioned me with a handful of US officials. With this kind of retaliatory actions, the Chinese are not allowing my mother to return to the United States to reunite with her American grandchildren, most of them whom she has not had a chance to meet yet. I consider this as a hostage taking and clear retaliation against and interference in my service in the US government. My point in saying this is not for your sympathy, but to reiterate, this is the adversary we're facing. Today, the citizens of the free world cannot say that they could escape from the brutal realities of the existential threat that the CCP poses to the democratic system, freedom, and liberal values. The Uyghur genocide is an illustration of China's intention towards the world. In order to truly understand the worldview of CCP, we must be clear on why the Uyghurs and Chinese Christians and Taiwanese, Tibetan, Hong Kongers, and dissidents and others have been targeted. China's rulers have a very eye on the potential revolutions. Dissenting ideologies could undermine their hold on power. So naturally, those with a distinct ethno-religious identity will be easy targets. The CCP's increasing hunger to exert influence abroad is also largely in part because of the understanding that there's thinking and approach that uprisings everywhere or dissent in any place can be a threat to the regime everywhere. We should see the reality of what the CCP is prioritizing. Even China's alliance with Russia in the midst of Putin's brutal invasion is not an anomaly. Rather, it's consistent with CCP's ideological goals in alignment through decades of leaders. The Uyghur people have already paid an enormous price for the international community's appeasement approach, and inadequate determination to confront authoritarianism. For decades, we have operated under the naive belief that China would reform over time. This is a wishful thinking that would be disastrous to continue to accept. The current situation with China is not devolving just because of one person, a valiant figure like Xi Jinping. Rather, it is because of the system, the Communist Party-ruled regime. Their repression at home and aggression abroad are consensus. This is a fulfillment of their envisioned destiny. How can we cooperate with CCP, knowing what they have done to their own people? How can we use the phrases like responsible competition in reference to hostile opponent that refuse to abide by international standards? These phrases are not just meaningless, in fact, they are harmful in continuing to project a false reality that will further ensnare us. To put it mildly, it would be irresponsible to cooperate with this genocidal regime. With respect to our own government's approach, we must realize that we cannot compromise on human rights and expect meaningful cooperation in any other areas. For example, the Special Envoy on Climate has articulated that lack of focus on stopping the genocide is because, I quote, "Life is full of tough choices." I disagree. We should not believe in that regime that has such a disregard for the lives of human beings will make any true progress on climate issues. We cannot ignore the fact that polysilicon used to manufacture solar panels linked to forced Uyghur slavery, linked to Uyghur slavery. We cannot treat climate change as a short-term problem and allow producing such vital goods to be dependent on modern-day slavery. Diplomacy cannot prioritize dialogue as the end result. Diplomacy is a tool to reach consensus or create shift, not the goal itself. The international community's naive approach has allowed the CCP to evolve into an entity that uses diplomacy as a tool to put us in a straitjacket. CCP does not view itself as able to coexist with what we would define as a value of humanity. As Halbrand and Michael Beckley's recent book articulated, I quote, "Xi Jinping believes that CCP's domestic power will enhance if authoritarianism is prevalent and democracies are dysfunctional, because fellow despots won't punish China for human rights abuses, and the Chinese people will not want to emulate chaotic liberal system." This is an excellent example of how CCP will not only continue to terrorize its own citizens, but also aim to roll democracy back overseas. What might once have been viewed as just an ideological struggle is moving towards the lateral. In light of the atrocities in Ukraine, we cannot ignore what the Chinese leadership has said regarding intentions for Taiwan, including the goal to re-educate the population there as they have started doing in Hong Kong. Just as they have not stopped with the Uyghurs, we cannot be certain that Taiwan would be the final step in attaining China's new imperialist goals. Taiwan is not the only target in overcoming the century of humiliation that the Chinese leaders refer to and believe that they must seek vengeance for. Remember, China has both territorial and maritime conflicts with all of its neighbors. We also know that ignoring Russia's invasion of Georgia, Crimea, military operations in Syria has been both costly and consequential. And China has figured out how to play us using our own system against us. Democratic countries are consistently forced to make statements from a defensive position about the things they're not pursuing. For example, we always hear our officials to say, we're not supporting this, we're not against this, specifically in the case of Taiwan. In case CCP in fact, the CCP has perfectly grasped the US system. They manipulate the words that our senior leaders have said factually and in earnest. Words matter. We should not let the CCP misuse our well-intentioned words against us. Otherwise, we will be pushed into in constant defensive position. An important component of accomplishing a new world order that the CCP desires to create is through a new system of digital authoritarianism. The Uyghurs have been used as a test subject for many technologies. Their phones, as we have read in the news, been monitored for foreign apps, reference to religion, or any foreign context. The results are cross-checked with QR codes outside of Uyghur homes. This rapidly built system of digital authoritarianism is more expensive and frightening than most of the world has realized. It's been actively exported for use by other authoritarian regimes. And meanwhile, as these tools are utilized against vulnerable religious and ethnic groups, the tools of surveillance also are being injected into Western societies. While most people don't feel immediate sinister nature and feel that they are gaining convenience without examining the cost. You may have seen the report, there are millions of Hikvision made cameras installed in the streets of London. In one instance, one of the US military bases in the United States were also using Chinese camera. A country that runs camps for millions of people, innocent people, is touting its facial recognition software, which can pick up an individual face of 1.4 billion in seconds. This software being deployed to identify ethnic groups, even human emotions. Most people are unaware. I've been repeating myself on this one piece of news from last December that the US government added Chinese Medical Military Academy and its 11 affiliates to Commerce Department's entity list, which is a export ban list for developing brain control weaponry to be used on ethno-religious groups in China. This should disturb you. This should alarm you. A technology and economic development supposed to foster freedom and improve our lives. But the Chinese progress in this sphere, in science and technology and economic development, are not moral progress. China's technology has been used as an enabler and a facilitator for collective punishment and enslavement of vulnerable population. I'm often asked why Muslims are not speaking out against China. Unfortunately, this is not realistic to expect Muslim countries to speak. The right question is, why can't those Western liberal democracies to take a tough stance? That should be the right question. As we know that some Western liberal democracies are avoiding to take action. These are the legitimate conversations we should be having. We also often hear, what about the Chinese people? How come they don't have a voice in this? Should we expect the support from them? But in today's China, Chinese people have enormous restriction placed upon them, and censorship is widely accepted way of life. But beyond that, the issue of why Han Chinese people don't speak out against the Uyghur genocide is it's not primarily because of they don't know, but it's a level of propaganda and effectiveness of the state brainwashing efforts, purposefully installed ultra-nationalist views that perpetuates the values of blood and soil about the value of humanity. We can see the dangerous implications of this ideology playing out. International bodies and organizations tasked with preventing mass atrocities are compromised by Chinese influence. As Jessica pointed out, the former human rights chief released that report, long-awaited report, literally 13 minutes before her term expired. But disappointingly, this report, under the Chinese pressure, and seriousness of the Chinese atrocities have been watered down. As we have seen in the news that the Chinese even allowed to edit this report. So there's no word of genocide, and they also use the words such as maybe to describe the atrocities being committed against the Uyghur people. So what can we do? What can be done? The most effective way to address this threat and put the last halt to the atrocities is to impose high cost on CCP and continue to call them out through concerted, collaborated efforts in cooperation with liberal democracies which have economic, trade, and tech ties with China. We must remember that solidarity between democratic nations in confronting authoritarian alliances is vital. The CCP is taking this approach by providing weapons to the enemies in the context of technology, surveillance technology, of the free world by shielding them from consequences. They're also offering them a model of how to develop their own regime. In other words, the Chinese way of, Chinese form of governance is becoming a new normal in certain areas in the world. We must match their efforts. Liberal democracies must develop additional tools, legal authority, sources to ensure that technologies, particularly US technologies, don't inadvertently enhance the capacity of the Chinese government to violate rights of religious and ethnic groups and dissidents in China. There are also many things that those sitting in this room or watching online can do. As a citizens and residents of the United States, we should push policymakers to incentivize investors and venture capitalists to avoid investing in Chinese companies implicated in human rights violations. We must push the US government to continue to ensure that Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which went into effect in June, is fully implemented. We should support legislation to impose further sanctions, and particularly secondary sanctions, not just on the perpetrators, but on their network and the financial institutions that are propping them up. The sanctioning supporters of a slave labor bill is a piece of legislation that will create further means to do so in the US Congress. We must continue to commit to shaping international standards to manage and govern the spread of CCP influence. As students and professors, you can urge your administrators to divest from campus endowments from companies linked to forced labor of the Uyghur people. Continue to raise awareness, write about the Uyghur genocide, and seek opportunities to continue to raise awareness and educate the public, particularly about the ways that the Uyghur slavery is tied to the products we consume. As those in academia, we know that the true education is pursuit of truth and understanding. In this spirit, we must act to uphold the values of humanity and democratic freedoms that we treasure. Thank you again for allowing me to share some thoughts with you today. I trust that each and every one of you in this room will be an ally in this fight to defend human rights and dignity in the face of oppression and brutality. This is what is worth standing for our world and also the future generation. Thank you very much.